AK-40 scuds to the floor. We touch 160, brotherly love. Songs of the earth lie in the wheels, sweet porridge on the night air. The lights of Philadelphia go down in the back window. Our high ace intercepts a slow VW, tramp steaming to the south. Heave to and board beneath stars' flares. This is a new order out of the old. This is the remembered future to be endured as love again, to hold close, sharing the common blanket, sharing shoulders, here where all are elders, breathing the one carbon monoxide through the floor. We cross the Winterveld to Monday, work. This world, the one sleep wakes us for. Now, as Dave's flattering introduction pointed out, I've recently been a visiting professor in Vercelli in Italy, and I came back, I think 3 days ago, on one of those long haul flights that takes you overnight and by day or whatever across 2 hemispheres and 2 continents, and puts you, if you are at all like me, I think this is a common human experience, into that slightly hypermanic space where everything is a little bit skew and out of joint, but more vivid and real and particular and marvelous in consequence. So the second poem I want to read is a poem about long-haul travel, and it's called Equator, that being the line which gets crossed every time I make this north-south, south-north transit in my life. Equator. We drowse in the perpetuum, eventually awed by the human compress, our mass mutual intubation at altitude, whether drugged or distressed, night transit again, traversing the globe in a thin nylon blanket, brittle with static. The long amen of the engine's breathing becomes our own. Far below lie the fires of settlements, of which these dreams, sliding on the window, a suddening to mind, of the justice far past. I am vivid among ghosts again and again, like the loop in the playlist. They come through the grass of a summer in my teens, looking north to mountains, and my love for you then is diffused through some total I cannot explain, but is the sweet grass and the rock, the duration of days across years, the compass of a young heart high in ambition. The day is red-lettered in the upper air before the throne up there, where the life is judged on these crossings. Writing this, I know what it means to bless all unawares. I watch my own film on the screen of closed eyes. Always the 2 women crossing the rising road who climb through the fence and walk on into Lesotho. Not dreams then, but waking reveries, never more alert or alive, equally close to the past and to prophecy. They answer the description of love with conviction, but leave also the certainty that love is a question and not its answer. It is easy to say we are so transported. And yet this, though it is the platonic vision I am vouchsafed at 30,000 feet, yet it remains Eros who accompanies me through passport control. For want of the body's earthing, I take an airport coffee and then stand outside in the season of another hemisphere, always smelling different, ever the first impression. And I feel as surely aroused as spiritually translated. The elderflower and diesel of a northern summer, or the flinty scent of winter light itself. I strike the first match of the abstinent hours and smoke a cigarette, and am as free as I'll ever be. And each body is a story in the sudden expectation of the arrived world. So, later, when I leave my village and the dawn due its dreaming, I leave my poems at number 8 across the piazza, whom I loved with conviction and never hear of again or see. I've trying to think which poem should come next. I have a care, as we all do, I suppose, in the present moment, of the rest of creation. And I'm constantly amused, or bemused, I should say, by the way in which South Africans, for example, in particular, are prepared to rally around anything bigger than themselves in the cause of its conservation. Witness our sentimentalization of the rhinoceros, which has become a kind of an icon of conservation for putatively progressive thinkers. But we nonetheless take our cans of doom to the kitchen cupboards and surfaces and make sure that anything smaller than ourselves, from a mouse to a rat to an insect, is duly killed. And of course, we do the same with microbes all the time. This poem celebrates insects, which are our most abundant fauna, the biomass of beetles, I believe, adding up to the biomass of all other creatures on land themselves. And it signals my concern for the way in which insect populations are collapsing across the planet in the face of the contemporary ecocide. So the poem is simply called Insects. Insects that are the language of nights and high noons and the signature of silence too. Consider only the lateral snow of migrating whites, erratic but moving north across the farm, and the dead quiet of the ferryman walking against water on hot days while the grass screams under its breath or erupts underfoot. These you take too for granted, as that invisible biomass fidgeting at the edge of rational concerns and the human compass, now past negligent, the smudge on the windscreen, that pus streak of abdomen burst on the glass and writing something not more than itself, never as clever as thorax or arthropod. But while the radiator ticked in some scorched shade, you used to admire the torn and the crucified, the harvest there of your industrial shrike, its mowing the air that is now simplified of small things, wings, which by night bore to the light court in the hissing mantle and battered the glass there for their share of the same grace as held you, encompassed and illumined, in which you saved face and read the writing you cared to, and thought nothing of the shadows cast by that preposterous love, so surely blinding that blew in your hair like the light's own air got up, as in the wicks of Pentecost. The penultimate poem I want to read from my collection, Night Transit, is a kind of love poem, but it comes with a caveat that I think all true poets should make a statement about. It is not about anybody in particular. My students at UCT often want to know who the object of desire was or the object of affection in a particular poem that we're studying. And I have to point out to them that the poet is, as often as not, thinking platonically rather than erotically. And that's certainly the case in this particular poem. There is no woman in particular behind it. The poem exists merely as a fiction, as it might appear in a novel or something like that. And it's called The Photograph He Kept. Driven by desire to desire longing, for want he kept her photograph against the odds of time and changing houses, for where she had signed it with light and salts, shown her particular constellation of bones bending naked for a fallen book. They read no more. It was not then he kept, but the memory itself, the glare of the flash setting like a winter sun in the bay window, books falling further into disarray every time she stooped for them. Most of all, she paled into significance, becoming less and less the body he once held down like a job and was beholden to, but all that memory can ever hold, something tending to soul, of bones blown, evacuated by years and years of radiation. Every year he whitewashed them again. Every year he saw less of her, but the stars pricking out her joints and the dark vacancies for which he had first applied. The last poem I want to read from Night Transit is a kind of memoir of myself, aged 13, living a relatively independent life as a young boy at boarding school in the Eastern Cape, which became a numinous landscape to me for its conjunction of my coming into adulthood and South Africa's confrontation across the succession of frontiers and frontier wars that characterized that particular part of the world. So it conflates my first coming into the access of an adult love with a reckoning with the tremendous fallout and horror of the South African circumstance. It's called A Full Confession, and it has a short epigraph by the young Quaker Sarah Lyons Grubb, dated to 1832, which simply reads, "When I grew to about 13 years of age, I was contrited under a sense of power and love. Even in this life, we have more than one. I knew it on frontier roads, years past, knowing in the rear view, which is a mirror true only to our always leaving now, a cast iron gate, a farm, divided ground, garrisoned with aloes, their staves of fire. I drove away as down the dwindling coral avenue, drove down a backward glance, where all my selves were shed as the spent rust skins of flowers, tinder under the wheels, thorns and claystone gravel, the gathered dust settling on us under the common law. Yet knew the place, and what of it? This redoubt on blood ground, a place of shouts and small war, fire seething in thicket of bird goats, night puttering in the generator, and filled with whistles out of the third polity, bristling in resumption every dark. Do not forgive me that I was there once glorified. Nothing was less simple then. Strange, but I cannot complicate you now. Recall the thrilled dogs nipping the air, cold, reserved sunlight in winter, and the waiting on whistles doodling out of sight, and wives in nylon and on nylon folding chairs. And then the barrage of 303s, ordnance docking scuts of soil, the horned ram ploughing it up to his kneeling elbows. And who was praying to whom? A carcass later on the flatbed, night falling like soot, handfuls of hot samp, your samp eyes drifting mawkish to the iron barn to kiss until your knees shook. Could we hold in common arms one country of vicious grace, the quiet ram, somewhere impossible, of a samp manor? What faith on false ground? I grieve it all. Now, it being much on my mind because I'm on sabbatical currently from my day job at UCT, and I'm living a year's night job in which I have writing projects at hand, and I'm turning more and more to a kind of hybrid writing or a conflation of writings around the subject of the Eastern Cape. I want to go back to a book that precedes by quite a while in time the Night Transit, from which I've been reading, and read another poem which is also about the Eastern Cape and the reckoning that I have had to make with it continually over the many years intervening between my puberty and my now quite senior adulthood. This poem is called Talking After Dark. The days repeat themselves, an hour by windless hour, the birds, etceteras, contrive philosophy. We go about our work, blessing all even things. But even so ourselves, we have the measure right for talking after dark. we sleep outside at night. And while the world ignores such uneventful lives, we, pottering about our sunlit clearing, know the blessing vests in us, thus blissfully becalmed. At anchor we have spread our maps like treasure. My great-aunt's writing board absorbs what little pressure our lives transmit, while there, knee-deep in the plumbago, lunch is laid and laughter reminds us of our body's capacity for pleasure. This is our common ground, whose peace we have betrayed in anger or in sorrow, brooding on passing time, living only for tomorrow. Here on the eastern coast, a corrugated land conceals us from the sly ambition of the sea, its whispered love and grave imperial embrace. We have all history in which to reckon bones, and all that history shows is mortal frontier zones. And so we love this place, in part because it's not yet our inheritance. For now the flaming sword is rumoured but deferred. And though on evening walks we hear the gardener sing in his teeth and wield his shears and see them flash, yet now we need not yield. We sleep outside and dream that ghosts file down the paths into the colony, and each one carries fire and knows full well how dreams cover our days like thatch. Stars fall, but not on us. We are in love for now with now. The dead forgive better than we do now. Love tied the knot of time in you and me, and now our knotted hearts become the measure of our love. This is the riddle prompts all poetry, and why we find ourselves confound the promise they once showed of the abundant life. We are a twisted code. From ridge to ridge the fires wink to affirm our part. There is no scheme of things. Old wars are still being fought in this unlikely time, in this complicated land, and will not go away completely or for good. What keeps the heart in time is ultimately blood. What draws the infant's breath rusts in the coarser veins. What shakes the lover's ribs flows to the field of war. This is what we are here for. This is what is so sore. Together calls the pulse under stars, under sheet, under skin, under sleep. Together is how we meet. This is the common life we thought we had in mind, braving our various fears. The unmarked car, the phone, dissolving sleep in news. The stranger overnight, whose disappearing first brought panic to the door. Our rumoured future came, closer and something more. It came to mean our shadows, cast by the fire of war, share in a mutual dark without distinction, share the common future that is all of ours, in which we find our common cause. We find that cause is one because we always lose the world we have begun. And if our cause against extinction cannot win, we are constrained to make common cause with one world while we can, to keep abundant the abundant life in which we find ourselves in love, at work, with sunlight on our backs, or talking after dark. For my last few poems, I want to turn to poems which I consider very much poems in draft at the moment. These are poems that I've written in the last 2 or 3 months, and which hold for me a particular significance of the moment. And I am kind of wanting to read them, to hear myself read them aloud for the first time, which is an important editorial stage for me. I write and then I edit and then I produce a fair copy and I let it kind of drift down the inbox of my folder which has my poetry in it, and after a passage of weeks or months has elapsed, I pull it out and read it again, and ideally read it aloud as a kind of testing. So that is what I have at hand for you at this juncture. The first poem I want to read has no title at all at this stage, and it goes simply like this. Perhaps here it is the want of ancestors, of some repute. It seems the colony has done them too. No ghosts come. Yet days are days, frantic or beneficent, and the fabric of the suburb stays the same. I cannot type your name, but lie. The ghosts don't come but bide in me. To some extent they're penciled in. I can't begin. It's been too long now, the now too long, and urgent some sort of reckoning, a neck to string, from the one flex hanging down in the dim cell, a scalding bulb, a chair. We're all met here. Who lived it through, parked cars unmarked, handshakes and undertones. Now count these loans, of a green sword of years, half devoted, where we met and met, are always meeting, yet are brought to this now, too long ghosted now, and know not how to say exactly what was meant. But this, in this way I once loved you all, as common to the cause, alive, my smoke and yours, breathed singly. We believed, and of blind trust are blent into one memory, of you. I constitute myself, both terrified and free, relatedly. Let's honor then the lost cause and the gained, the muezzin in the fog, cartons of Texan plain, the room on Lower Main. My hope is one by one, you come to me as true, for me to wash your feet as mine once were, and greet me with the kiss of l'amourette, and stay and talk the night away, and stand up to the day in which we're grown astray and old enough to know that what was meant was grave and something now to save. So that poem, which I hadn't intended to follow on the poem that dates back to Foundling's Island some 15 or 20 years ago, strikes me as very much the same poem written over. And I find in my seniority that quite often I am going back and writing over material that I've written before, perhaps refining it, perhaps I am confronting a deeper truth, which is that all poems flow into a single one. As David's reading of Rob Beryl's marvelous river poem suggested, there is a kind of fluidity that binds all poems in a common contour and drags them to one destination as rivers to an ocean. This poem is called Witness. I wrote, out of shadow in a city where shadow falls hard. I meant it. There's so much I meant and would now want to degrade, like uranium, take back, as they say, or say, that's not what I meant. But we are meant into being and do not ourselves do the meaning. Are you following? What I am now telling you is deeper than the wells of my bulked ventricles. I saw Shirley Temple share her wrist's blood with another before I could possibly grasp it. That is what I am after. If I could lie alongside and transfuse all your life long, the past in the present discovers the future. In my last hour, it will fill everything and leave no room for even the air. So I will stop breathing this into your ear. Only you should know I have sat on the street trying to reach you, trying and trying to say into the air something solid, to say into being what matters, as if I could conjure a clod or a clot. The air is swaying over the city. I am writing it down, and cars are going towards every driver's death. But you will not die, if only you give me your mouth, and gladly I will put the words in. So my final two poems concern immediacies. The first is the death a month ago of my mother, something I didn't think I would be able to write about. I had imagined that grief would be too overwhelming. And yet, strangely enough, I have taken her death thus far with some degree of equanimity and surprised myself by producing a skein of poetry of a confessional variety that is not, as it were, common to my general male disposition as a poet. But this poem is written from Italy shortly after a quick return for my mum's funeral and back again. And it's called Thalassa, which is Greek for the sea, and which my mother always used to say when she arrived on the ridge overlooking the houses of the village in which she and my father lived on the Eastern Cape coast for the last part of their lives. So the poem is called simply Thalassa. Should this be grief, heart beating high in the back row of the Pullman to Vercelli, chewing gum as farms rotate and hooded crows row over? I know you've gone, and yet I cannot fathom it. So essential you are. Today your jeans are rattling across Italy, spring catching like a green flame, the paddies flooded, all grey mud, as you now are. I note my sisters supply your fingerprints, living proof of your specific death, your ID document behind my books, once lever of a public life. I cannot imagine you lying cold, relaxed after rigor, filled with fluid, your pale Scandinavian eye clouded like a cooked fish's, that saw so clearly what a world it was. Remember before you lived there, you're arriving, the view from the ridge, Thalassa, you'd say, under all that breath you had left, that was yet not enough. And the final poem I want to read tonight is called Crowded Postcard. It's a memoir of the 2 very happy months that I have just spent in Italy teaching poetry to young Italian students in the very pretty little city of Vercelli to the immediate southeast of Turin up in the north. And it's a hymn really to that place, and those people, and the people I left behind who have been so important to me in my life. It's called Crowded Postcard. You, with your swift, shrill cities, piazzas of potpourri palazzi, burnt earth and cobbles, where bars embrace, and coffee's bitter enough to scald. You who wear wide jeans and scents of white flowers, whose magnolias have burnt into green succession, and who smoke more even than I do. You live in state, as a pope lies, this end of April in the year of our Lord whatsoever. Be sure that nor ground nor watered bells be lacking ever, and be ready for me. Bring me your most wounded, whom I have loved in equal measure, or drunk or defaced, your quiet interstices of air between the raindrops swirling, as later those swifts as formerly I have written. Be blessed with Christ's own gratitude for the beer bought and the hand on my shoulder that carried too much to be far about, but circled you and yours, and slept late, and taught the magnificence of my letters to your receptive young, from Wolfe to Whiston, always wondering how I might square Dover Beach with L'Infinito, while Wisteria became suddenly Glicine, and almost drowned me in peace and sweetness of a new word in the mouth. You served me right, like the restaurant Brenta and Blue Bar and Bugs Bunny, alliterating the letter as the verb to be, my linear be. Ciao Bella. You to whom farewells are trivial and always broken like promises. Yes, I will be back. and compass you again, swaying on your buses home in a condition where home has become as widely attributable as the pronoun you. For whom does one write but the beloved, as Coetzee said, and my age proved? I have come a long way by the hill lights of Addis Ababa, sleepless and elated, from one season to another, which is traveling upward and down, only elated in grief, as grief can do, gripping the world like a lemon, as everyone has. It is that simple. The swifts by a trick have resumed as bats in the courtyard, this my last night among the stumbling bells. And it is time to turn in and dream of an elsewhere impossible to consciousness, yet ready to be believed, because you, as Pierrot said, must have faith in something and keep it, as I have been kept and kept keeping by you. Thank you. That's all I have for you this evening. I am very ready to answer questions and to revisit the process of writing or anything specific to these particular poems, but I'm equally easy to hand the microphone over to those who wish to read their own poems forthwith. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Peter, for that very wonderful, moving reading. If I could just ask everyone just to, for a moment, just to put on their videos and just give Peter a round of applause for that. I'm noticing a fair bit of that there, Peter. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we now move into a phase of questions and comments. Just maybe to start off myself, when I hear your poems, Peter, I mean, obviously the themes of fleetingness, transition, transit, death, passing, just comes through in such a powerful way, and that link then at the same time, that tension between that and merging. This, where's the solid ground, the meeting point, the love, and it always feels that when I'm listening to that in fact the rhythm and the meter is a very central part of how you in fact construct that. And I'd just be interested in how you marry those themes and how conscious you are in your technique around the sound, the rhythm, the meter, and so on.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. Very apt observations. I think when I was younger, I undertook to teach myself to write. And I schooled myself by imitation in a very formal approach to poetry, which I think is correct. I'm glad I did it. I believe that you've got to be able to draw before you can paint, and you should start as Picasso, being capable at 15 of doing an old master and being capable at 90 of drawing like a 4-year-old. But that said, it's true that the remainder of my years have been spent trying to unlearn what I learnt of the formal prosody of English poetry. And it surprises me, reading one or two of those poems, whatever, to find myself writing rhyme, for example, which I thought I'd long ago let go of, but which creeps in as an internal feature all the time now. It surprises me that although I no longer count feet or syllables or anything like that when I write, that the poetry often finds a certain regularity of cadence across the line and so on and so forth. I think that's fine. I really think that in a way one casts away the scaffolding of the formal prosody that I undertook in my very, very early poems as a 20-year-old or so, teenager, 20-year-old. But what one is left with, I hope, is a capability or a capacity to produce a language that reminds us of the fact that 99.9% of language happens verbally and vocally rather than in written form, and that language therefore has a musical contour all the time. And so without wanting to formally score my work as a Mozart or a Beethoven might set about doing so, I'm nonetheless quite happy that my poetry produces a music that is cognizant of a Bachian education in counterpoint, or whatever the case may be. And I think that I would kind of dream ultimately of a poetry that let go of the specificity of meaning and recused itself entirely to a point at which sound alone was making the sense, insofar as there's sense to be recuperated in sound. Some poets have tried that. You think of John Ashbery, for example, who writes a kind of nonsense poetry that is nonetheless exquisitely musical and has a cadence that's unforgettable, original, unmistakably his own, and so on. I am not yet able to do that out of a want of talent or a want of will or an acknowledgement that it's been done before. But I do, yes, concur that my thematic, which is often elegiac, certainly in the poems that I've read tonight, is seeking a kind of elegiac music. And I'm glad to hear that that is heard by you. That is something that I would not want to do consciously, but yet strive unconsciously to attain. So that pleases me, yeah.
Thanks. Any other comments? Maybe just indicate with hands in the chat or participants list. And I've got Karen first of all, and then Jacques.
Hi, Peter.
Hello,
I suddenly I feel like a little girl, but what I wanted to say is that I've entered middle age, very much entered middle age, because I'm feeling immensely grumpy. For the first time in about 18 years, I'm teaching first years, and it's enough to make one weep for the future of mankind. Not least of all in terms of poetry, or what they understand as poetry, or don't even understand. And so I'm, on the one hand, I'm looking for you to comfort me and to say it's always been this way, don't fear, life will go on even though 18-year-olds are dreadful poets. But on the other hand, what I also feel, and I'm wondering if you are noticing this in your capacity as a teacher of creative writing, both here and in Italy. Have you disappeared?
I
No,
disappeared.
Peter's still there, but his picture's not there.
I was trying to
Okay.
again. Sorry.
No, don't worry. And then, so I was just wondering, what is, in terms of your experience in Italy, and then looking at South African writers, or young writers, I feel like there is a real disconnect between their understanding of private writing, so scribbling your feelings in a notebook, and then taking that and honing it and making it into something that really is poetry, and a skillful artistic product that you then share with people as the public product. I feel like there's the sense that the scribble is enough. That is enough. That is worthy of accolades on TikTok and all these dreadful places. So is that just me being old and grumpy? Is that the reality? What can you tell me? Comfort me, please.
Okay. First of all, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry if my picture's vanished. I can't manage to get it back. I'm operating on my phone rather than on my computer, and if I stub my finger too much, I'm going to switch it off. So we'll do with my voice for now. Karen, I sympathize with what you're saying. I think the I think there are two factors here. The one is youth, which doesn't really have very much to write about. Virginia Woolf said nobody should publish anything till they're 30 because, quite honestly, they don't have anything to write about. You know, they just don't have enough life or reading behind them or whatever to do so. And that may be part of the problem. I think that there's a great outpouring on social media of youth-directed and youth-derived poetry of a kind of falsely gnomic variety that is pat and silly and is encouraging people to believe that identities can be constructed in words in simple Hallmark style post kind of sort of pat propositions. I think that's part of the problem, but I think there's a deeper problem which arises in the post-war years, and it's the rise of what we call confessional poetry, which in the hands of a powerful practitioner, Sylvia Plath, or a Robert Lowell, or someone like that, whoever can attain extraordinary heights and be universal and compelling. But unfortunately, in the vast majority of instances, particularly given the conflation of confessional poetry with the ongoing romanticism of most commercial popular music, many young people believe poetry is a kind of vomiting of the self-neuroses, or a kind of a opportunity to produce a sort of a Rorschach blot of their life, or whatever, for therapeutic purposes. And of course, it doesn't make for good poetry. It makes for stuff that is cringeworthy and lamentable. That stranglehold that confessional poetry has on the contemporary continues, I think, in large measure. I don't think that postmodern poetry has done much to dislodge it satisfactorily, or I think it's been too weak to stand up to it. I'm inherently dubious of confessional poetry. I think it's very difficult to believe that people are genuinely interested in the I position when that I is as isolated or as self-obsessed as much young writing or grown-up writing or post-war writing happens to be. So I think that those are the twin sources of your anxiety. Having said all that, I will relieve you by saying that I have certainly, during my years as a lecturer, come across half a dozen to a dozen young poets who are considerably better than I am. And there's no doubt about it. They may have gaucheries of youth about it or whatever, but I've been often enough bitingly jealous of the abilities of certain young poets, and they're out there. I think the real problem is that there is abroad an idea that poetry is a kind of brushing of the teeth or going to the lavatory, a necessary kind of bodily function of being, which is mistaken for something more than a bodily function, which is it frequently resembles, unfortunately.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just going to ask Jacques and David to give their comments, and then hand over to you, then Peter, to wrap up. Jacques, you next, and then David. Jacques, you're muted.
And now you can hear me?
You are unmuted and clear.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. I'm curious about your... I'm deeply curious, actually, about your remark around love poets writing often towards the platonic rather than the specific. And I think it has to do with the argument that you're making, that you're just making about confessional poetry. I have a lot of sympathy for that argument, but I'm curious because I've always thought that love poems tended to be stronger if they did have someone specific in mind, and I've always been wary of abstraction. So I don't know, what are your What are your thoughts around this? You could say a little bit more about it.
I think you may well be right, and I may well be wrong on this. I suspect that behind every poem of love or desire that I write, there is usually an originating personage, somebody that I have in mind. For whom does one write but the beloved? I think that that's there, and it's true. It's a clever formulation of Coetzee's, of course, because it means that everybody who's reading is necessarily incorporated in the category the beloved. But I don't like a poetry that kind of goes Janie, 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 I love you, Janie. I can't get over you, Janie, or whatever, with your lovely red ponytail, and so on and so forth. That too close a focus on a particular person or whatever person tends to me to seem self-isolating, enclosed. We all, just as we brush our teeth, fall in and out of love in life or whatever, and it has a great interest to ourselves biographically as we experience it. But we can't expect everybody to be interested in our love affairs, which after all follow very much the same patterns of everybody else's. It's a common human neurotransmissional storm that we go through. So I tend to prefer a love poetry which is more generally applicable. I'm thinking, for example, let's think of Auden's lullaby, lay your sleeping head, my love, human on my faithless arm. Time and fevers burn away individual beauty from thoughtful children. The grave proves the child ephemeral, but in my arms till break of day. Let the living creature lie mortal guilty, but to me the entirely beautiful. There is no evidence in that poem written in the 1930s when homosexuality was still illegal that the lover he's addressing is a man. The individual is entirely anonymous to the extent that most people in a heteronormative society would imagine it was addressed to a woman. And the poem yet seems to exceed any specific occasion and lay itself down as one of the greatest poems of iambic tetrameter, curtal tetrameter that's ever been written, along with Shakespeare's Phoenix and Turtle or Blake's Tiger, both of which are written in the same meter, and I think produce a very, very powerful English poetry. So, my instinct is that you may be right and I may be wrong, but I kind of will own to there being an originary figure, but that when I follow a line of a love poem through to its end, I don't keep that figure in mind the whole way through. They float, and that you becomes, as I say in one of my poems, marvelously indeterminate or multiply applicable. I have a game that I play in class where I point at one person and stare at another, and I say, I'm talking to you. And the you falls between the two people, the pointed at and the stared at. And I think that good poetry does that. It chucks the pronoun you out, that stem cell of speech or whatever, and germinates a kind of culture in which a generality of reference is framed. Yeah.
And us almost.
And us, I suppose, yes.
Thanks, Rock and Peter.
Very
But David is on the next comment.
Hello, Peter. Thank you so much for the reading. It's quite a privilege. I remember there used to be a video up on YouTube of you reading Sunday Night, which I can either no longer find or which has been taken down. And I consider that quite a loss. But I noticed in the reading, I was following along in my copies of your books, that there seemed to be a few emendations. It brought to mind Robert Lowell's comment that he would do this as he was moving away from his Lord Weary's Castle style to the style of life studies. He would do this in readings, change words on the fly. And in Talking After Dark, I noticed we go about our work blessing all even things, and even so ourselves. That is how it's written in the book. But you changed it to but even so ourselves, a very minor point. There was another one in Equator, and the line is, and then stand outside in the season of another hemisphere, always smelling different, you read, whereas in the text it's all smelling different. I'm wondering if going back to some of these poems, you do find rhythms or certain words that you would wish to change in retrospect.
Yeah.
You spoke about going over previous material and sort of rewriting poems in a much broader sense, but I'm wondering, your feelings about that.
Yeah, that's bang on. I noticed the always as I said it rather than the all, which is written in the text in front of me or whatever. And I was surprised at myself. I think this goes back to what Dave was saying or asking at the very beginning or noting, whatever, that there's a kind of musicality which overwrites or underwrites the poetry as a whole. And when I'm producing a verbal rendition of it, such as this or whatever, I can discover in myself a new word or a word that seems to me it falls out of me as more conducive to the rhythm of the poem in situ, whatever. And I learn by that. That's precisely why I leave the poem for a while and then read it aloud, whatever, for the plain music of it, so that I'm over what it's talking about and I'm now into how it's making a noise. So you're quite right to spot that. I didn't pick up that I had produced an in situ emendation in Talking After Dark, but I suspect you're absolutely right that once again, I would like to hope that my musical ear is correcting a verbal infelicity in the in the contour of the sonic of the poem, the auditory experience, or whatever, and I'm writing into that. But it may just be that I need to clean my glasses. I don't know. But I am interested in that, and the truth of the matter is, yes, it's absolutely the case. Foundling's Island, which you can't see, I'm holding up here, has a poem early on in it called Full Moon and Porcupine, and in the copy that I have in front of me, whatever, I've got a line through a whole stanza, which I now don't like at all. And if I was to read it, that whole stanza would go. So I know that Lowell infuriated his editors by, constantly rewriting or whatever. Every single galley proof he got, he would rewrite the poem. I'm not as bad as that, whatever, but I don't think a poem's dead until the poet's dead or whatever. And it's a work in progress, forever. Paul Valéry said, and I think he's quite right, that a poem is never finished, only ever abandoned. And there is that about it. So sharp ears, sharp eyes. Well done. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that brings us, Peter, to the end of the Q&A. I think a really rich, fascinating discussion. So thank you so very, very, very much for that, and for the reading. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you. Last round of applause for Peter.
Thank you all for the platform. It's a delightful occasion for me.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks. And we'll take a brief break of just a couple of minutes, and then we're coming back for an open mic. And again, we're going to do one poem each, and we'll see how far that in fact takes us, to be indicated by the hands that you put up. That's going to be the easiest way to manage it. So let's give ourselves 3 minutes, and let's give us 3 minutes. At 8:35 we reconvene and we start the open mic. Thanks.
All the best.
Thanks, Peter.